Beginning at a young age, humans are bombarded with a variety of gender, social, and racial stereotypes and generalizations. Little girls are prim and proper, while boys are allowed to be boys. Children from a low socioeconomic background are expected to be more disobedient and disruptive, while those with a more privileged background seem to have more class and culture. Society tends to pass judgments based on outward appearances, and generalizations are often made with racial biases. This is no exception in the courtroom, where imperfect people who hold stereotypical views are defending, prosecuting, bearing witness, or even holding the gavel. A portion of criminals behind the bars of a prison are faultless. Judges and juries may have placed innocent people into isolation due to an unfair bias. Without equal treatment, the court system will continue to be corrupt. Law courts across the United States should render fair trials to all people, setting aside any prejudice and stereotypes, and justly follow the law of innocent until proven guilty. This social injustice is also evident in Margaret Atwood's novel titled The Lies Grace. In the novel, a maid named Grace Marks was convicted for a murder she recalled no memory of. Without any solid evidence, she was sentenced to life. In the novel, Grace Marks explained that people around her had, quote, already decided she was guilty, and once people make up their minds that you have done a crime, then anything you do is taken as proof of it, end quote. Atwood 355. There are countless stories similar to that of Grace Marks. 4.1% of all people who are put on death row are actually innocent. Since 1976, there have been 474 executions in Texas. Of those 474, about 19 people would have been faultless. 19 people stood in confinement and isolation for a majority of life and was killed for a crime they did not commit. In Alabama, a man named Anthony Ray Hinton was on death row for 30 years before being exonerated. He was convicted for murdering 2 managers at a fast food restaurant. The prosecutor for Hinton's trial explained that he could see evil in Hinton just by looking at his face. With no concrete evidence, the prosecutor determined Hinton guilty only looking at the exterior. Brian Stevenson, Hinton's attorney, said, quote, race, poverty, inadequate legal assistance, and prosecutorial indifference to innocence conspired to create a textbook example of injustice. I can't think of a case that more urgently dramatizes the need for reform than what has happened to Anthony Ray Hinton, end quote. Hinton's case is a clear example of why the court system is flawed due to racial and societal bias. Brian Banks, a 16-year-old African-American student, was accused of raping a 15-year-old girl and was looking at 41 years in prison. However, Banks pleaded for 25 years, knowing he was innocent. He was sent to Chico State Prison for a 90-day observation and was ultimately sentenced to 6 years. On the other hand, Brock Turner, a star athlete at Stanford University, was found guilty of sexually assaulting an unconscious woman. At the trial, the prosecutors asked for a sentence of 6 years. Instead, Turner walked away with a mere 6 months in prison. Even with that sentencing, Turner's father claimed that 6 months was too long for only 20 minutes of action. Banks, the African-American student, was innocent but received a sentence 12 times longer than the guilty white college student. They were tried for the same crime, but the color of the skin determined the punishment they received. Without careful, prejudice-free trials, injustice will continue to thrive in law courts. These unlawful convictions happen due to stereotypes against the defendant. Although the African American population represents a smaller portion of the population, there is a larger amount of black people in jail compared to whites. Using racial prejudice, judges and juries wrongly accuse many non-whites. In a study conducted in Georgia, they found that 20% of black defendants arrested for murdering a white person was put on death row. However, only 8% of white people who killed another white person received the death penalty, while 1% of blacks who murdered another black were sentenced to death. Some people may say that stereotypes stand true for most of the group and therefore should be used against the defendant. But as an individual, the defendant should be judged solely with the provided information. Making generalizations prevent a fair, lawful trial. It leads to the jailing of countless innocent people. Others may argue that sending a few innocent people to jail isn't a big deal and it won't affect many people. They could explain that there will always be inevitable errors that will not be fixed. However, the job of the judge and jury is to filter out as many mistakes as possible, the biggest mistake being prejudice. The absence of prejudice will prevent innocent people from being convicted. It was said by Benjamin Franklin, quote, that it is better 100 guilty persons should escape than that one innocent person should suffer, end quote. Rather than seeking to lock away all the evil, the priority should be truth and justice. Guilty people should not be caught at the cost of innocent people. Others may question if prejudice can be truly changed. Would the effort be worth the while? Prejudice and biases are so pervasive that a change would be at the cost of great striving and perseverance. However, no change has ever come without great cost and sacrifice. Countless people, such as Martin Luther King Jr., fought great opposition for many years for equal rights. Civil war tore our country in half, and many lives were lost in order for slavery to be outlawed. But no one would declare that these sacrifices were in vain. In the same way, we must fight for the rights and lives of innocent people. Although past conflicts in history have been a hindrance towards equality, society can walk past it. The social injustice of racial prejudice has been present for more than centuries since colonial times, but generation after generation, that social injustice still exists. Change can and needs to happen. Change can be created through the actions of hundreds of thousands of people. One tiny step made by many can evolve into one giant step for the world. Despite the longevity of the injustice, racial prejudice can be ended together. Racism is not inherent, it is taught. Just as racism is taught, equality can also be taught. By being surrounded by others who are in effort of eradicating stereotypes, it is possible to erase racial prejudice. Each generation has the ability to teach the next. Eventually, through education and persistence, equality can be achieved.